For more about all of this and to discuss what wars America should and should not fight, we are joined tonight by Richard Haass. He is the president of the Council on Foreign Relations and the author of a new book, War of Necessity, War of Choice, a memoir of two Iraqi wars. Richard, good to have you back.
Thanks, Martin.
Let's talk briefly first about Pakistan. Do you foresee the possibility that this could be a conflict, a war in which the United States military could be drawn in more actively than just drones?
If you mean large numbers of American troops on the ground, no. But I could imagine two situations, what I would describe as a war of necessity, where the United States could get someone involved. One would be with special forces going after, say, terrorist concentrations. Secondly, if the worst happened, which is that the Pakistani nuclear weapons, they have perhaps 100 of them, somehow either fell into the wrong hands or people feared they would fall into the wrong hands, I can imagine the United States either putting small numbers of highly trained forces on the ground or doing something from the air.
Do you think, because of the crisis right now in Pakistan, that Pakistan has superseded Afghanistan in or for the mindset of the Obama administration?
It's interesting. People use the expression AFPAC. In some ways, really, it's PAC-AF. It's Pakistan that has the nuclear weapons, not Afghanistan. It's Pakistan that's host to most of the terrorist organizations, not Afghanistan. But it's hard to do things in Pakistan. It's hard to figure out what exactly it is we can do to protect our interests. In Afghanistan, we have introduced a large number of forces. This has become Mr. Obama's first war of choice, his first big discretionary war, where he's trying to improve the situation. But ultimately, Pakistan is far more important.
I want to get to that issue of choice. In your book, you described the first Iraq War as being a war that was necessary, and that the second Iraq War was being one really of an unfortunate choice. Would we be in as much trouble as we appear to be in Afghanistan had we not focused on the second war in Iraq?
It's a good question. The answer is no. That said, the original decisions after 9/11, after we got rid of the Taliban in Afghanistan, the original decisions not to do more in Afghanistan, which at the time I argued we should do because I was in charge of the future of Afghanistan put there by the president, those decisions were made simply because people were negative or pessimistic about what the United States could accomplish in Afghanistan. They essentially said, this is a place we don't want to invest heavily, we can't turn it around. So over the next few years, we didn't do much. Now, it's possible that over time, Iraq obviously became something of a distraction. But the original reason that Mr. Bush chose not to do more in Afghanistan was simply what you might call strategic pessimism, that a large American investment wouldn't pay off.
When we look at the first Iraq War, then we look at the subsequent second one that followed. What is the difference between the two, the planning and also in the policy?
The differences are profound. I called the first one a war of necessity, the second Iraq War one of choice. The first one, we didn't really have alternatives. We had vital national interests at stake after the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait, and we didn't have policy alternatives that could reverse that invasion and occupation short of the use of large amounts of military force. But when the recent President Bush became president, there wasn't a sudden crisis with Iraq. We didn't have to go to war. We had other options. So the fundamentals were different. Then the way the decisions were made were very different. The first President Bush, much more systematic. The staffing, the planning, the thinking was very formal. The second President Bush got what I would describe as the National Security Council process he wanted, but not the one he needed. It wasn't a very disciplined, rigorous process. The ways we fought the war could not have been more different. You remember the first war, heavy U.S. troops, the so-called Powell Doctrine. The second war, we went in very light. The United States had a minimum of
Plus
forces.
a coalition.
Exactly. The first war was largely multilateral. The second war was largely unilateral. Again, almost every way you would define it, the two wars could not have been more different. But one other thing, the first war was a limited war. We simply what we tried to do was simply to get the Iraqis out of Kuwait. The second war sought to transform Iraq, to make it a democracy, and through that to try to transform the entire Middle East, a far more ambitious approach to American foreign policy.
Do you think if the second war had been better planned, better executed, not necessarily militarily, but the rebuilding afterwards, that the outcome would be much better?
I think it could have been better. Indeed, if you look back at the memorandum, actually, that I wrote in late 2002, which the Secretary of State then shared with the President and others, a lot of the recommendations, and it wasn't just me, that others made as well, about not getting rid of the Iraqi military, about not banning everyone in politics who had been part of the Iraqi Ba'ath Party. If a lot of those things had been done, I think the situation could have been better. But Martin, it still would have been an expensive war of choice, given the nature of Iraq. And it's one of the reasons, quite honestly, that I argued to the first President Bush, we don't want to march to Baghdad. This is an incredibly complicated, messy society. I feared then, and I feared years later, that it would prove to be a very expensive initiative.
Richard Haass, thank you very much.
Thank you.